سيد مايكل مولروي مساعد وزير الدفاع الأمريكي السابق، أهلا بك في نيوز. في البداية، بناء على خبرتك والمعلومات المستقاة من اتصالاتك الحالية، ما هو حجم الضرر الذي لحق بالمنشآت النووية لا سيما بعد الضربة الأمريكية الأخيرة؟
So, Wasim, I think we're seeing that some of the initial assessments of the effectiveness of these strikes on the facilities at Fordow, Isfahan, and Natanz has been leaked. Apparently, it indicates that the program itself was only set back months rather than what would be expected, which could be a year or longer. It's important to find out what those assessments were based on, whether they were different than the pre-strike assessments, because of course that would have been done to give the president knowledge of the decision he was going to make. And then whether this was based on just preliminary information, could it change over time? We don't know because there's a lot of questions. Of course, there's always an issue when classified information is leaked, but there's a lot of questions I think that Congress is going to have on just how effective these strikes were.
نعم سيد ميليروي، يعني في سياق التأكد من نتيجة الضربة الأمريكية، هل ثمة خيارات يتم درسها حاليا تكون أكثر فاعلية لحسم الجدل فيما إذا هذه المنشآت تضررت فعليا أم لم تتضرر كما كان الأمريكيون يقولون؟
The only way to really ensure that Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapon or that the sites have been degraded to a point of destruction is to actually put boots on the ground. And, it's a term that's overused, but most of the scenarios leading up to the US's confidence level being high that we have destroyed their capacity is the insertion after the strikes of a special operations force that can go in and either confirm complete destruction or remove the material, the weapons grade uranium, destroy the centrifuges, or even remove weapons that might be made. So that's something that would involve a more complex and a more in-depth action by the United States and potentially Israel to do. And I think that's something that hasn't been talked about much. It has been talked about by analysts, of course, military analysts, but something that we hope doesn't have to happen. But it is something that could cause this war to further escalate.
نعم، على خلاف ما يعرفه الجميع، هل تعتقد أنه من المتوقع أن تعترف طهران علنا بحجم الضرر الذي لحق ببرنامجها النووي أم لا؟
No, I imagine Iran would try to conceal just to the extent of damage that was done to these facilities. I think one can know that when you drop 12, 30,000 pound bombs on anything, it's going to cause damage. So the question I would have is if we think that the enriched uranium was moved or the centrifuges, excuse me, were moved, of course, it could have caused major destruction to the facility, but it might not have set back the nuclear program or the ambitions of Iran at all, because that's still intact. So there's a lot of questions that I think people rightfully have. Most importantly, Congress, which has an oversight function of military intelligence and, of course, foreign policy. It's unfortunate and somewhat unprecedented that the briefings were canceled. So there's going to be a lot of questions. A lot of them are political, of course. But from a military and intelligence perspective, it's really important to determine just why we made this assessment, because it's unlikely that the commander-in-chief would have conducted this type of operation for just a couple of months worth of delay.
نعم، إلى أي مدى يمكن أن تشكل اليوم محاولات إيران إعادة بناء منشآتها النووية تهديدا فعليا؟ وماذا وراء إعلانها عن نقل اليورانيوم المخصب إلى مكان آخر؟
So it's certainly not easy to rebuild something as complex as Fordo, for example. It went down, it's believed, it's not known, but believed down to 300 feet below the surface with really complex reinforced tunneling and spaces. So that's difficult. And I think if they tried to do that again, it's likely Israel would strike them again. Of course, Israel has air dominance right now. And I think the majority of their intelligence obviously is focused on whether Iran's going to try to reconstitute this somewhere else. But there was open source imagery that trucks had pulled up to these facilities prior to the strikes. And I imagine the intelligence community of Israel and the United States and Europe are trying to determine what those trucks loaded and where they went. So it might not be over. There might be more additional military actions to try to mitigate if that's the case. I don't really understand why Iran's saying they actually moved this, because it's only going to contribute to potential future strikes when Israel thinks they determine where they went, and then strikes it. And Iran has said that they moved their enriched enriched uranium. And it's also important to point out that Iran's enriched uranium, we know, up to 60%, which is well beyond the use for civilian power. So this is an issue that I don't think is over. There needs to be a thorough, objective assessment of what actually happened and how much these strikes affected it. But it's important to point out that the objective still remains when it comes to preventing Iran from getting a nuclear weapon by both the United States and Israel.
نعم سيد مولروي، إذا تم بالفعل إضعاف البنية التحتية النووية لإيران، كيف يمكن أن يؤثر ذلك على الحسابات الاستراتيجية لطهران؟ كيف يمكن أن تتصرف أو يجب أن تتصرف؟
So one thing that every regime member who talked on the topic publicly said prior to these strikes is if these facilities were struck, we would go toward getting a nuclear weapon. Before, they said they never had any intent to do so. Unless they've changed that policy, I think it's going to be assumed that they're going to try everything they can to get a nuclear weapon, because it's obvious that when it comes to conventional military force, they're completely overmatched, not only by the United States, but by Israel. So they might believe that acquiring a nuclear weapon now is absolutely necessary for regime longevity, much like North Korea. It's obviously a different situation in North Korea as it is in Iran. And the one big difference is North Korea has deliverable, we think, nuclear weapons. So I think it's likely that they will go for that. So the United States and Israel's intelligence community is going to focus very, very much on this. That's why I'm saying that this might not be the one and done, especially if Iran doesn't come to another agreement with the United States to verifiably ensure that they are not going toward a nuclear weapon. And of course, their benefit would be considerable sanctions relief.
بالانتقال إلى وقف إطلاق النار الذي تم إعلان عنه مؤخرا، ما الذي يعنيه هذا الوقف لإطلاق النار فعليا؟ هل هو هدنة طويلة الأمد أم مجرد توقف مؤقت بانتظار الجولة الجديدة من التصعيد؟
So good question. I think it's very unstable. We could see leading up to it, there was back and forth who violated what. We obviously saw the president of the United States, President Trump, get pretty upset. I think it's important to point out that the United States essentially knows when things are done, right? So if a ballistic missile fires off, we can see it from space. There's satellites that pick up infrared flashes. There is ground-based radar in countries around the Middle East that the U.S. has that can see these launches, can see planes in the air, can see strikes hitting the ground on both sides. So it's not just a guess. I'm sure the president was briefed on who was doing what, firing what, and what was a violation. So I think his anger, and of course the influence that the U.S. in general and President Trump in particular has over Israel, will be one of the anchors that keeps the ceasefire in place. And I think that's obviously to the benefit of everyone involved, especially the civilians in both Israel and Iran.
نعم سيد مولروي، برأيك هل ما شاهدناه من مواجهة مباشرة بين إسرائيل وإيران هو الذروة في التصعيد أم أن الأسوأ لم يأتي بعد؟
We should hope so, right? Because it's one thing to watch in countries from afar, these conflicts, they're horrible, but in the country, they're even worse, right? So generally speaking, there's civilians being killed that are caught in the middle, and nobody should want to see this continue. But this could get far worse. There is, of course, the potential that Iran gets a nuclear weapon. Then you would have a nuclear-armed Iran. Would that be acceptable? Would there be a preliminary strike on those weapon systems by Israel? Probably so. I imagine they would even acknowledge that, maybe even the United States. But then there could be an exchange of nuclear weapons. And it's important to point out, every scenario where even there's a limited exchange of nuclear weapons, is catastrophic not only to the countries, but to the world's environment. The global environment could be significantly changed, what would cause major repercussions when it comes to crop growth, radiation fallout. It is not an overstatement. So it's important for everybody to ensure that this doesn't happen. And one of the ways to ensure that is that Iran doesn't actually get a nuclear weapon.
نعم، على الصعيد الاستراتيجي اليوم، هل تعتقد فعلا أن إسرائيل نجحت في إعادة فرض الردع على إيران بعد هذا التصعيد، أم أن إيران فعليا خرجت من التصعيد الأخير بشعور القوة؟ كيف ترى ذلك؟
I think they've established deterrence. I think Iran can see, despite their rhetoric, that their air force and their air defenses were completely overcome in less than 2 days when this started. So if you don't have that, we don't see a chance of a ground confrontation, then you're essentially defenseless. That's why Israel has gone down from nuclear sites to military sites to economic sites to transportation targets to decapitation strikes of leadership at a very high level and very far down. They have shown that they have the capacity to really dominate Iran on the conventional military front, which means Iran's hardliners for sure, and they were before this, but they're for sure now saying they have to get a nuclear weapon, and especially in the IRGC. So I think there's going to be a race toward a nuclear weapon, and that's one of the criticisms of taking these strikes. There's no easy answers, so I don't pretend that there is. But this is going to be something that the intelligence community focuses on, and we could see reactions militarily based on what that intelligence tells us.
وبرأيك ما هي العوامل الأساسية التي يمكن أن تعيد الصراع إلى المنطقة مرة أخرى؟
Well, I think if there's indications, credible intelligence that Iran has either a secret facility that are trying to enrich uranium to the point of weaponized uranium. They have to, of course, miniaturize it and put a detonation mechanism on it and then have a way to deliver it. But there's old-fashioned ways. I mean, we could see at the end of World War II, a simple gravity bomb that detonates before it hits the ground can cause massive damage. So it is something that I think the world should be concerned about. Iran's only other option is ballistic missiles, and I think the assessment right now is about 1,200 left and about 200 launchers. And Israel has destroyed most of their manufacturing capacity. So that's a finite resource. So Iran doesn't have a whole lot of options. They could, there's been a lot of talk about mining the Straits of Hormuz to block it. That would affect Iran as much as anybody else, any other country in the world. They ship 100% of their oil through the Straits of Hormuz, and mines obviously are agnostic to which ships they hit. And of course, the biggest client is China, and China gets a lot of its energy from the Gulf. The U.S. does not. So mining the Straits of Hormuz, although it could be catastrophic to the flow of energy, or certainly significant, it's not really going to affect the United States, and it would mostly affect Iran. And so it's unlikely to happen. The only other option would be terrorist threat networks that Iran could attack, soft targets, diplomats around the world. That would bring the United States into this. That would cause Iran even more problems when it comes to defending themselves.
نعم سيد مولروي، يعني أما اليوم والمنطقة تعيش هدوءا بعد كل هذه العاصفة، ما هو السيناريو برأيك الأكثر ترجيحا في المنطقة؟ هل نحن أمام عودة إيران لاستخدام حرب الظل؟ هل نحن أمام اتفاق أشمل؟ أم هل نحن فعليا أمام صراع مفتوح في المستقبل؟
So I think the Trump administration is going to push for negotiations to resume to get to a place where Iran and the United States can agree to a new JCPOA, the one that President Trump pulled out of in 2018, that is more stringent than the 2015 agreement. Why? One, because that's politically what he needs to do to explain why he pulled out of the original one. And two, it's obviously in the US's interest to make it more stringent. And that's really going to hinge on whether Iran will agree to accept that they can't enrich uranium in Iran, that they will be part of this multinational consortium that other countries are in, in which they receive enriched uranium from outside the country that they use for nuclear power. Now, it's important to point out Iran doesn't really need nuclear power. They have an abundance of natural resources and energy. But considering they want it, they can still have it. According to the United States negotiators, but they just can't enrich. And that's something that Iran has said they will not agree to. So this is by no means guaranteed. But if they can get back to a nuclear agreement, then I think the U.S. would put considerable pressure on Israel not to continue any strikes in any form, unless, of course, they're attacked by Iran, because they want to make sure that this agreement holds and is consummated and continues.
نعم، ولكن فيما يخص وكلاء إيران الإقليميين، هل تعتقد أنهم ما زالوا فاعلين كما كانوا في السابق؟ أو الأصح، هل ما زالت إيران قادرة على إعادة بناء هذه الأذرع والوكلاء في المنطقة وتشغيلهم كما في السابق أم لا؟
I think they have diminished a lot. Obviously, Hamas has been decimated in Gaza, has Gaza itself. There has been considerable strikes and decapitation efforts against Hezbollah. They have been largely degraded, and I think a lot of these groups now see that doing the bidding of Iran did not work out well for them, and certainly the members of these organizations or where they live. So that's going to be a challenge for Iran to try to reconstitute, even if they even want to. It costs a lot of money to keep these groups in business, and the consequences now are not being fully absorbed by the groups. That's one reason why Iran has proxies, is they can have some kind of deniability. Well, Israel, I think, has seen through that and has shown that it has no problem attacking Iran for their actions, at least in part, by their proxies. So that might be a policy shift that makes proxy operations not as effective politically as they have been in the past.
نعم سيد مولروي، سؤال أخير. يعني تم الإعلان عن وقف إطلاق النار بين إسرائيل وإيران، ولكن لم نعرف ما هي بنود هذا الاتفاق، على ماذا يستند، ما هي المعلومات لديك بهذا الخصوص؟
So that's unclear. I think there was a lot of disagreement on the terms, which is why they have been withheld and left vague, at least as far as what's publicly known. But essentially, the core of any ceasefire agreement is that the two sides stop engaging in military action against each other. So, what the terms are, I think, are important, but not as important as actually getting each side to stop fighting. And that's the part that hopefully stays. But these are two countries that have zero trust in each other, and it could easily ignite. The United States is now definitely the broker and the enforcer of this agreement. It's clear that the United States wants to see the fighting stop.
نعم سيد مايكل مولروي، مساعد وزير الدفاع الأمريكي السابق، شكرا جزيلا لك على هذا اللقاء.
You too, Yassine. Great talking to you and great questions.